In 1939, at the start of the Second World War, the Franklin Roosevelt administration passed what was called the Protective Mobilization Act. Ultimately, this act would lead to the creation of the War Production Board. That was the body that was responsible for the manufacture of tens of thousands of aircraft and tanks and other weapons which played a key role in the Allied forces winning the war. In 1941, President Roosevelt declared an unlimited national emergency. What it basically did was give his administration the power to shift all the industrial production to military requirements. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States supplied almost two-thirds of all the weapons used in the war. America alone produced almost 300,000 aircraft, over 200,000 artillery pieces, and close to 100,000 tanks. It is noteworthy that today, 70 years on, the United States and its NATO partners are all facing supply problems as the war in Ukraine grinds on. While the US and Europe maintain a significant commercial industrial base, which is needed to supply some of these key components, Russia, on the other hand, lacks an in-depth civilian manufacturing infrastructure. And this is particularly so in advanced electronics, in optometry, and of course in sensors. On Crux Decode, is this war running out of weapons? How long can the US and NATO continue supplying Ukraine with weapons? Now, one of the constraints laid bare after the pandemic, and particularly after this war, has been the intense supply chain bottlenecks. And this extends not just to normal industrial production, but also to military equipments. The United States and Europe face a risk because they are increasingly dependent on high-tech supplies from Asia. Today, there are severe supply chain bottlenecks, as well as shortages and cost inefficiencies. Even China, which has a huge commercial manufacturing base, it too faces difficulties in obtaining the most sophisticated integrated circuits. Remember, these circuits are manufactured only in Taiwan by the Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation, or the TSMC, which manufactures more than 90% of the semiconductors in the world. Procurement of defense goods, both in the US and in Europe, it is not a continuous process, it is episodic. It depends on the orders that are made. Funds are allocated to purchase a certain quantity of defense equipment. When the contract is completed and the purchases are done, then the production lines are shut down. And eventually the workers and the engineers, they move on to work on some other project. Now this means that if a new order comes in late, or if there's a supply surge, then the supplier network and the production lines will have to be started almost from scratch. Now what that means is that it will take months, if not years, to restock supplies back to its original levels. Already, the Ukraine war has depleted a third of the stockpile of weapons that America and its partners have had. They will need quick replenishment if the supplies to Ukraine have to continue at the current pace. Now this is a fear that America and its allies are acutely aware of. Because speaking last week at the House of Lords, the Chief of Defence Staff of the UK, Admiral Tony Ratkin, said that it could take years because you cannot whistle up with modern weapons a quick production line. You can churn out shells and artillery, but even at the modest end, basically even if it is to manufacture an anti-tank weapon, then that is going to take several years to get back to the original supply levels. Now, in the recent war legislation to support Ukraine, the US Congress had appropriated an additional $9 billion to replace US war stocks. Now, what this suggests is that the cost of manufacturing and inflation have almost doubled since the beginning of this war. Raytheon, which is one of the largest weapons manufacturers in the US, got a new resupply contract of $600 million to restock Stinger missiles. But Raytheon pointed out to the US government that it could not begin production before early next year. In fact, in the US, big defense companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are facing serious difficulties in resupplying the military equipments. The US has already sent more than a third of its war stock of Stinger as well as Javelin missiles to Ukraine. And as this war continues to grind on, it is not unreasonable to think that as much as half of the war stocks of these missiles will be consumed. Now, there are two major dangers for the US and NATO as a consequence of this weapons shortfall. The first is that there is simply not enough equipment in the inventory to keep up with the pace of supporting Ukraine. And that is if this war is going to last many more months. So the hope from Washington as well as its European partners is that either there is a peaceful resolution, and quickly at that, or that Ukraine is able to overwhelm the Russian forces in the east pretty quickly. And the sad reality is neither of that seems to be happening anytime soon. The second danger, and this is again has great consequences for the US and for global security architecture, the second danger is if the fighting now extends into a new theater. What if tomorrow there's a flare-up between North and South Korea? Or what if tomorrow China decides to invade Taiwan? Now, this could put an almost impossible burden on the United States. There are already serious military supply shortages for US forces who are stationed both in Korea and in Japan. Taiwan, in fact, has been told that America cannot supply some weapons, including some of the same howitzers that are being supplied to Ukraine right now. So, net-net, we come to the conclusion that the US and Europe also have a vested interest in trying to bring some sort of closure to this war as quickly as they can, because if nothing else, this war is simply going to run out of weapons that could help Ukraine eventually push back Russia.